The fluorescent lights in St. Marlo's Community Hospital hummed faintly, their sterile glow washing over. Room 407, a nurse in pale blue scrubs leaned over the bed, clipboard in hand. Her voice was steady, almost rehearsed. Time of death. 3/4 The man in the bed, 64-year-old George Halstead, lay motionless, his skin pale but warm to the touch. Machines that should have been whirring and beeping had been disconnected. 15 minutes ago. In the corner, 2 orderlies averted their eyes, their silence louder than any alarm. A doctor scribbled something on a form and handed it off without looking up. In the hallway, George's real daughter was still in the waiting room, sipping stale coffee, unaware that her father was already marked as dead, even though his chest still rose and fell beneath the thin hospital blanket. 3 days earlier, George had been admitted for routine gallbladder surgery. He was a retired postal worker, careful with his diet, still walking 3 miles every morning. The surgery had gone smoothly. No complications, no infection. His doctor even joked, "You'll be back to walking faster than your mail route in a week." But something changed after his insurance provider flagged him as terminal. In their internal system, a classification George had never heard of and his family never approved. That night, a hospital administrator named Ellen Marks reviewed George's chart. She didn't see a patient recovering well from surgery. She saw a lucrative opportunity. In the world of healthcare fraud, a living patient with a clean bill of health is worth one kind of payment. But a patient who dies in the hospital, under certain billing codes, can unlock insurance payouts that are 5 to 10 times higher. For Ellen, who had orchestrated dozens of these cases before, George was a windfall waiting to happen. If you were George's family and found out, he'd been declared dead before he actually passed. What would you do? Would you call the police, a lawyer, or go to the media? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This is a real-world dilemma. More families face than you might think. Kindly subscribe to the whitecoatsecrets channel. In most fake death scams, the first step is not in the ICU, it's in the billing office. Ellen pulled up George's file and began altering diagnostic codes. The new record showed severe respiratory distress, end-stage organ failure, do not resuscitate status, DNR, falsely signed by patient. Once those codes were in place, George's insurance provider would greenlight a higher reimbursement rate for terminal care, plus a lump sum death payout when he was pronounced. The doctor overseeing George's case, Dr. Leonard Pitt, wasn't entirely in on the scam, but he wasn't blind either. His quiet compliance was bought with promises, extra funding for his department, a larger year-end bonus, and the unspoken understanding that this is how things work now. While George lay in room 407, receiving intentionally reduced oxygen and sedatives that slowed his breathing, his daughter Megan was texting her brother across the country. Megan, Dad's surgery went great. Probably out in a few days. Brother, awesome. Tell him I'll call tonight. They had no idea that somewhere in the hospital's back office, a death certificate template had already been opened on a computer. The only thing missing was the time of death and the signature. By the time the sun rose the next morning, George was officially dead. His daughter was told it was sudden heart failure. No autopsy, no questions asked. Would you accept a hospital's explanation at face value? Or would you demand an autopsy even if it meant delaying funeral plans? Comment below, your answers might surprise other viewers. 2 weeks after George Halstead's death, a wire transfer of $2.4 million hit a bank account belonging to St. Marlo's Community Hospital. On paper, it was listed as a bereavement settlement from Consolidated Life and Health. George's insurance provider? That money should have gone toward hospital improvements, debt repayment, and legitimate patient care. Instead, it began its journey down what insiders called the payout pipeline. Step 1, hospital executive bonuses. A chunk was carved out for leadership incentives. Ellen Marks, the administrator who altered George's file, quietly pocketed $110,000 in performance pay. Step 2, vendor contracts. The hospital funneled large sums to shell companies, posing as medical equipment suppliers. These companies billed for goods that never arrived. Step 3, personal accounts. Through a complex layering scheme, portions of the insurance, payout ended up in private offshore, accounts in Belize and the Cayman Islands. It was a clean operation until one junior accountant, Rita Mendez, spotted something that didn't add up. Rita had been with St. Marlo's for less than a year. She didn't know all the politics, but she knew numbers, and she knew a gallbladder. patient with no comorbidities. Shouldn't generate a death benefit of that size. One evening, she pulled George's billing file. The DNR signature looked strange. It was shaky, uneven, like someone had forged it. She cross-referenced it with George's actual admission form. The signatures didn't match. The next morning, Rita approached Dr. Pitt in the parking lot. "Rita, doctor, can we talk about George Halstead?" Pitt pauses. "I don't know what you think you saw, but for your own sake, let it go." That was the moment Rita knew this wasn't a clerical mistake. It was a cover-up. If you were Rita, would you risk your job and maybe even your safety word to blow the whistle? Or would you stay silent to protect yourself? Drop your answer below. I want to see how many of you would take that risk. Hit the subscribe button to avoid missing out on subsequent episodes. Rita didn't have a lawyer. She didn't trust HR, but she did know a journalist. A local reporter named Evan Ford, who had covered hospital scandals before. One night, she slid an unmarked manila envelope under his office door. Inside, copies of George's falsified chart, the wire transfer records, a list of shell companies tied to hospital executives. Evan didn't know who sent it. But as soon as he opened the file, he recognized a pattern. This was not the first. Suspicious payout from St. Marlowe's. Over the next week, Evan traced similar insurance death benefits to 9 other patients, all of whom died under unexpected circumstances during routine care. The dollar amounts? Always between $1.5 and $3 million. The shell companies? Always different names, but linked to the same corporate mailbox in Florida. It was a fraud network hiding in plain sight. Evan's first story dropped quietly online. Are hospitals profiting from patient deaths? The piece didn't name St. Marlowe's directly, but it laid out the numbers, the patterns, and the strange coincidence of healthy patients dying after insurance reclassifications. By the next morning, the hospital's legal department was on high alert. Ellen Marks called an emergency meeting. "Ellen, find out who's talking. I don't care if you have to check every inbox and shred every file. We don't get exposed over this." But there was one thing Ellen didn't know. Rita wasn't done leaking. If you were Evan, would you publish the hospital's name without absolute proof? Or would you wait until you had airtight evidence? Comment below. This is where investigative journalism gets tricky. Hit the subscribe already and turn on notifications. The storm didn't start with thunder. It started with silence. The kind of heavy, brittle silence that settles in when people realize the ground beneath their feet might not be solid. At St. Marlowe's, whispers had started curling through the hallways. Nurses who had been on George Halstead's floor remembered details they had been too busy to notice at the time. The rapid change from a stable recovery to critical condition. The way his family was told not to come until visiting hours the next day. The body's quick removal to a private wing. One orderly recalled seeing Dr. Pitt in the corridor late that night, holding a clipboard and muttering to himself, a tightness in his jaw. But none of them spoke openly, not yet. Because at St. Marlowe's, speaking up wasn't just frowned upon, it was punished. Rita Mendez knew that better than anyone. Her first leak had already put a target on her back. She had started noticing things. The same black SUV parked across from her apartment. 2 nights in a row, her work email suddenly inaccessible because of IT maintenance. Strangers in hospital security jackets, appearing on her floor with clipboards, but never asking questions. Still, she kept digging. Evan Ford received her second envelope 2 weeks after the first. This one was thicker. Inside was a USB drive containing internal emails between Ellen Marks and the CFO. Subject line: beneficiary adjustments. The messages were cold, transactional, discussing death certificates, reassigning payouts, and how insurance carriers will process faster if cause of death is simplified. Evan sat back in his chair staring at the screen. There was no ambiguity now. The hospital wasn't just negligent. It was engineering deaths. The more he read, the more it became clear. These weren't random mistakes. There was a sequence, almost a formula. The patients who died were always mid-tier insured. Individuals, not so wealthy they had. Expensive lawyers, not so poor they lacked coverage. The perfect middle ground. And then there was the detail that made Evan's skin crawl. One of the patients listed was still alive when insurance processed the payout. The official death date had been recorded 4 days before the patient's actual passing. He called Rita from a payphone. "Are you safe?" he asked, skipping any pleasantries. "For now," she replied. Her voice was flat, deliberate. But they're watching. They know there's a leak. The next day, the hospital issued a press release. It was brief and defensive. St. Marlo's remains committed to the highest standards of care. We reject recent unfounded claims circulating in the media and caution the public against misinformation. Rita knew that statement wasn't for the public. It was a warning to her. That night, she came home to find her front door ajar. Inside, nothing had been stolen, but her files, the binders and receipts she had hidden under her bed, were gone. The only thing left was a single sheet of paper on her kitchen table. 3 words printed in block letters, "Stop or else." She took a deep breath, sat down, and made her decision. The next morning, she met Evan at a coffee shop across town. They sat in the farthest corner booth, talking low. "I'm naming them," Evan said. "St. Marlo's, Ellen Marks, Dr. Pitt, all of them. I have the documentation. If we wait any longer, someone else will die." Rita hesitated. "If you publish, it's not just my job. I might not have a life after this." Evan looked at her, his expression sharp but kind. "You're already in their crosshairs. At least if the truth comes out, they can't bury you in the dark." 3 days later, the story dropped like a bomb. Headlines screamed across news sites. Hospital accused of killing patients for insurance payouts. Whistleblower leaks reveal death for profit scheme. The article went viral in hours. Cable news anchors debated it. Advocacy groups demanded criminal investigations, and state regulators announced an immediate audit. At St. Marlo's, panic erupted. Executives convened emergency calls with lawyers. Employees whispered in break rooms, some deleting files from their computers before auditors could arrive. And then, the most unexpected blow, George Halstead's daughter, Marissa, appeared on live television. "My father didn't die from a complication," she said, her voice trembling with both grief and fury. "He was murdered for money. I want everyone involved prosecuted to the fullest extent." The pressure mounted until Ellen Marks made her first public appearance, standing stiffly behind a podium flanked by attorneys. Her speech was clipped, emotionless. She denied everything, claimed the documents were fabricated, the leaks the work of a disgruntled employee. But her hands trembled when a reporter shouted from the back, "If this is all fake, why did you transfer $1.2 million to a Belizean account 2 days after George Halstead's death?" The silence was deafening. Behind the scenes, state investigators began pulling hospital records. They subpoenaed bank statements, interviewed former employees, and tracked payments to offshore accounts. One discovery turned the case on its head. George Halstead's body, which had been cremated according to hospital records, hadn't been cremated at all. The crematorium listed on the paperwork had no record of him. 2 weeks later, a decomposing male body matching George's description was found in an abandoned storage facility 40 miles away. The coroner's report showed something chilling: traces of a paralytic drug not used in any of George's treatments. The evidence was now irrefutable. George had been killed, his death staged, and his remains hidden to avoid questions. With the discovery, law enforcement moved fast. Warrants were issued. Dr. Pitt was arrested at his home. Ellen Marks was taken into custody at the airport, allegedly trying to board a flight to Panama. The CFO was found in his office, shredding documents when the investigators arrived. In court, prosecutors painted the picture: a tightly organized scheme where certain patients were targeted, their deaths expedited, insurance payouts redirected, and the money laundered through shell companies. It wasn't negligence. It was premeditated murder for profit. Rita testified under heavy security. Her voice shook as she recounted the forged signatures, the missing files, the threats. Evan sat in the gallery, scribbling notes, knowing this case would define his career, but also knowing it had almost cost Rita her life. The trial ended with multiple convictions: Ellen Marks for fraud, conspiracy, and second-degree murder; Dr. Pitt for manslaughter and falsification of medical records; the CFO for money laundering and racketeering. Each received decades-long prison sentences, but the verdict didn't bring George back. It didn't erase the grief of the families whose loved ones had been stolen from them. After the trial, Rita left the city, moving under a new name. She never went back to hospital work. She told Evan once over a rare phone call, "I still see George's file in my head at night. I still wonder how many more there were that we never found." Evan published a book about the case. On the last page, he wrote, "In the end, it wasn't the system that saved lives. It was one person alone in the dark who refused to look away." The scandal left a permanent scar on the public's trust in healthcare institutions. St. Marlo's closed within a year, Its building abandoned, its reputation unsalvageable. The moral lessons burned into everyone who followed the case were clear. Corruption thrives in silence. Evil often wears the mask of professionalism. If you suspect wrongdoing, speaking out might be dangerous, but silence feeds the rot. Paper trails tell the truth. Systems can be manipulated, but the documents, the transactions, the signatures, they always leave a fingerprint. Power without accountability is lethal. Without oversight, even trusted institutions can become predators. Justice needs courage. Laws and agencies exist, but it's the courage of individuals, like Rita, that turns suspicion into action. Money is the oldest motive. Behind elaborate schemes, it's almost always about profit. No matter the cost in human lives, by the time the story faded from the headlines, it had already planted seeds of distrust, awareness, and caution in the minds of thousands. And maybe, just maybe, that awareness would save lives in the future. Thanks for watching to the end. Subscribe to White Coat Secrets, where shocking true stories of medical neglect, misdiagnosis, and prejudice are exposed for the next episode. Meanwhile, leave your comment, like, and share this episode. I'll absolutely love to read from you. Cheers!